The stagecoach lurched to a violent halt in front of the Ukiah, California trading post, and when the door swung open, Franklin McCoy saw something that made his blood run cold. A young woman stumbling out with her wrists bound so tightly that the rope had chewed angry red marks into her pale skin. Franklin had been leaning against the hitching post outside Miller's General Store on that sweltering August afternoon in 1878, minding his own business and waiting for his order of supplies to be packed. He was a ranch hand at the Double Bar spread just outside town, a man of 26 years who had seen his share of rough dealings in this corner of Northern California, but nothing quite like this. The woman looked to be in her early 20s, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and tumbled wild around her shoulders. Her dress, though dusty from travel, had once been fine, the kind of thing a city woman might wear to church or a social gathering. But it was her eyes that caught him, green as spring grass, and filled with a mixture of defiance and barely concealed terror. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Horace, who Franklin knew by sight, climbed down from his perch with deliberate slowness. Behind him, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit emerged, his hand clamped around the woman's upper arm like a vise. Franklin straightened instinctively, his hand dropping to his side though he wore no gun, having left it at the ranch as he always did when coming to town for peaceful errands. "This here is my bride," the man announced loudly to no one in particular, his voice carrying across the dusty Main Street. "Willow Reed, coming all the way from San Francisco to marry me, just like we arranged." Franklin watched as Willow's jaw tightened, saw the way she tried to pull away from the man's grip, and failed. The few townspeople on the street that afternoon paused in their activities, watching with varying degrees of interest and discomfort. Franklin knew that mail-order bride arrangements were common enough out here where women were scarce, but something about this situation felt fundamentally wrong. "Why is she bound?" Franklin heard himself asking before he could think better of it. The man turned cold eyes on him. "Theodore Maxwell, if it is any of your business, which it is not. The girl tried to run when we stopped to water the horses 20 miles back. I paid good money to have her brought here, and I will not have her bolting like a spooked mare." "I never agreed to marry you," Willow said, her voice hoarse but steady. "My father sold me to settle his gambling debts. I have no choice in this matter." Theodore's face darkened. "You will learn your place soon enough, woman. Now come along. I have a preacher waiting at my house." Franklin felt something shift inside his chest, a burning sense of injustice that he could not ignore. He had been raised by a mother who taught him that women deserved respect and dignity, that force had no place in matters of the heart. His mother had died 3 years back, pneumonia taking her in the space of a week, and his father had followed within the year, some said from a broken heart. Franklin had nothing left but his honor and his conscience, and both were currently screaming at him to act. He stepped forward, placing himself between Theodore and the direction the man was trying to pull Willow. "I reckon if the lady does not want to marry you, you cannot force her. That is not how things work." Theodore's eyes narrowed. "Get out of my way, ranch hand, or I will have the sheriff throw you in jail for interference." "The sheriff might be interested to know you are keeping a woman bound like a prisoner," Franklin replied evenly. "That does not seem particularly legal to me." A small crowd had begun to gather now, drawn by the confrontation. Franklin recognized Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, young Jimmy Chen who worked at the laundry, and several ranch hands from neighboring spreads. Theodore looked around at the watching faces and seemed to calculate his options. "This is a private matter," Theodore said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Franklin kept his eyes on Willow. "Miss, do you want to go with this man?" "No, she said immediately, her voice stronger now. I do not. Then you are not going, Franklin said simply. He turned to Theodore. Release her. I paid $300 for her passage and the arrangement, Theodore sputtered. I have documents, a contract signed by her father. A woman is not property to be bought and sold, Franklin said, aware that his voice was rising. You want to sue her father for breach of contract, you go ahead, but you are not taking her anywhere against her will. Theodore's hand moved toward his coat and Franklin tensed, but the man only pulled out a sheaf of papers. I will have the law on you for this. Sheriff Turner will see reason. Then let us go find the sheriff together, Franklin suggested. Right now, all of us, let him sort this out proper. Theodore hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Franklin made his move. He stepped forward and produced the small folding knife he always carried for cutting rope and leather. Before Theodore could react, Franklin had grabbed Willow's bound wrists and sliced through the rough hemp in 2 quick strokes. You're free now, Franklin said quietly, watching the ropes fall away from her abraded skin. Willow gasped as blood rushed back into her hands, bringing with it a fierce tingling that must have been painful. She cradled her wrists against her chest, tears springing to her eyes, but when she looked at Franklin, there was gratitude shining there alongside the pain. You will regret this, Theodore hissed. I will see you arrested for theft. Theft of what? Mrs. Patterson called out from the crowd. I heard the whole thing. The girl said she did not want to go with you. Franklin here just cut some ropes. I do not see how that is a crime. Several other voices rose in agreement. Franklin could see Theodore beginning to understand that public opinion had turned against him. The man might have money and influence, but in a town like Ukiah, people still valued decency and fair dealing. This is not over, Theodore said, jabbing a finger at Franklin. But he climbed back into the stagecoach and ordered Horace to take him on to his ranch outside town. The driver, looking relieved to be out of the situation, snapped the reins and the coach rolled away in a cloud of dust. Franklin turned back to Willow, who was still standing in the street, looking lost and overwhelmed. Up close, he could see that she was even younger than he had first thought, perhaps 22 or 23 at most. Her face was lovely despite the tear tracks through the dust on her cheeks, with high cheekbones and a delicate nose. But it was the intelligence in those green eyes that truly struck him, the sense that here was a woman of substance and spirit. Thank you, she whispered. I thought I was going to die out here, trapped in a marriage to a man I have never met, who looks at me like I am livestock he has purchased. You are safe now, Franklin assured her, though even as he said it, he wondered if that was entirely true. Where can you go? Do you have any money for passage back to San Francisco? Willow's face fell. I cannot go back. My father made it very clear that if I returned, he would simply sell me to someone else. His debts are considerable, and apparently I am his only remaining asset. Then you will stay here, Mrs. Patterson declared, bustling forward. I run the boarding house, dear, and I always have room for a woman in need. You can work to pay your keep until you figure out what comes next. Can you cook or clean? Yes, Willow said quickly. I can do both. I can also read and write, keep accounts, teach children if needed. Educated too, Mrs. Patterson said approvingly. We can find uses for all those skills. Come along now, let us get you cleaned up and fed. You look half-starved. Franklin watched as Mrs. Patterson led Willow away, the older woman's arm around the younger woman's shoulders in a protective gesture. He felt someone slap him on the back and turned to find his friend Daniel Keller, another ranch hand from the double bar, grinning at him. That was quite the heroic rescue, Franklin, Daniel said. Though I hope you know Theodore Maxwell is one of the richest men in 3 counties. He will not take this lightly. I could not just stand by and do nothing, Franklin replied. It was not right. No, it was not, Daniel agreed. But you have made yourself an enemy today. Best watch your back. Franklin collected his supplies from the general store and loaded them into his wagon, but his mind was not on the task. He kept seeing Willow's face, the way hope had flickered in her eyes when he cut those ropes, the trembling in her hands as blood returned to her fingers. He had done the right thing, he was certain of that, but Daniel was also right about the consequences. Theodore Maxwell was not a man who took kindly to being crossed, especially not in public. The ride back to the Double Bar Ranch took an hour, giving Franklin plenty of time to think. The ranch where he worked belonged to an elderly couple named the Hendersons who had come west 40 years earlier, in the first wave of settlers after California became a state. They ran cattle and horses on 500 acres of good grazing land along the Russian River, and they treated their hands fairly, which was more than could be said for some outfits in the territory. Franklin lived in the bunkhouse with 5 other men, saved most of his wages, and tried not to think too much about the future beyond the next season, the next roundup, the next breaking of wild horses. But now, suddenly, the future seemed different. He could not stop thinking about Willow Reed, which was foolish considering he had known her for all of 20 minutes. She was educated and refined, a city woman used to comforts he could never provide on a ranch hand's wages. She had enough troubles without him adding to them with unwanted attention. And yet, the memory of her eyes meeting his, the breathless thank you she had whispered, seemed to have lodged itself somewhere deep in his chest. The next few days passed in the usual rhythm of ranch work. Franklin mended fences, helped break a new horse to saddle, rode the boundary lines checking for strays. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Ukiah, wondering how Willow was faring at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, whether Theodore Maxwell had made any more trouble for her. On Sunday, which was his day off, Franklin rode into town with the excuse of needing a new pair of work gloves. He found Willow sweeping the front porch of the boarding house, her hair pulled back in a practical bun and her dress covered by a clean white apron. The angry rope marks on her wrists had faded to pale lines, and there was color in her cheeks that had not been there before. When she looked up and saw him, her face lit up with such genuine pleasure that Franklin felt his heart skip a beat. "Franklin," she said, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. "I was hoping I might see you. I never properly thanked you for what you did." "No thanks needed," Franklin said, suddenly aware of how dusty his clothes were, how rough his hands looked. "I just did what anyone would have done." "That is not true, and you know it," Willow replied. "Half the people on that street just watched. You were the only one who acted. Mrs. Patterson told me you work at the Double Bar Ranch." "Yes, for the past 4 years," Franklin confirmed. "It is good work, honest work." Willow leaned the broom against the porch railing. "Would you like some lemonade? Mrs. Patterson makes it fresh every morning, and it is a warm day." Franklin knew he should probably decline, get his gloves, and head back to the ranch. But instead he heard himself saying, "I would like that very much." They sat on the porch in 2 rocking chairs, sipping cold lemonade and talking. Franklin learned that Willow had been raised in San Francisco, that her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her to keep house for her father, who had been a banker before his gambling problem destroyed his reputation and career. She had tried to find work as a teacher or governess, but her father had found her every time and dragged her home, afraid of losing his only bargaining chip with his creditors. "Theodore Maxwell answered my father's advertisement for a mail-order bride situation," Willow explained, her voice bitter. "He sent money for my passage, and my father put me on that stagecoach with a note saying I was willing and eager. I tried to explain to the driver, to the other passengers, but no one would listen. And then when we stopped at a way station, I tried to run. That is when Theodore had me tied up like a criminal. He had no right, Franklin said, anger rising in him again at the thought. No, but he had money, and money speaks louder than rights in most places, Willow said with a sad smile. I am safe here for now, but I worry. Mrs. Patterson says Theodore has been making inquiries, claiming I stole money from him. It is not true, of course, but who will believe me over him? Franklin set down his lemonade glass with a decisive clink. Anyone who meets you for 5 minutes would know you are honest. Do not worry about Theodore Maxwell. The sheriff is a decent man. He will not arrest you based on lies. I hope you are right, Willow said softly. Then she looked at him with those green eyes, and Franklin felt something shift between them, a current of understanding and attraction that made the warm air feel suddenly charged. Why did you help me, Franklin? You did not know me. I could have been a criminal or a liar myself. Franklin considered the question carefully. I suppose because I could see the truth in your eyes, and because my mother raised me to believe that a real man protects those who cannot protect themselves. It was instinct more than thought. Then your mother raised you well, Willow said gently. She must be very proud of you. She passed 3 years ago, Franklin said, but I like to think she would be proud, yes. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily despite their different backgrounds. Willow was well-read and articulate, but she did not make Franklin feel stupid for his limited schooling. Instead, she asked him about ranch life with genuine curiosity, wanted to know about breaking horses and herding cattle, about reading weather signs and tracking game. In turn, Franklin asked her about San Francisco, about books and music and all the cultural things he had never experienced. As the afternoon wore on, Franklin realized with a start that he needed to get back to the ranch before dark. He stood reluctantly, hat in hand, and Willow walked him down the porch steps to where his horse was tied. "Will you come back?" she asked, and there was a vulnerability in her voice that made Franklin's chest ache. "If you would like me to," Franklin replied. "I would like that very much," Willow said, and when she smiled at him, Franklin felt as though the sun had come out from behind clouds. He rode back to the double bar with a lightness in his heart that he had not felt in years. Over the next several weeks, Franklin found reasons to go into Ukiah every Sunday, and sometimes on Wednesday evenings when his work was done early. He and Willow would sit on the boarding house porch or walk through town together, always carefully chaperoned as propriety demanded. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Franklin learned that Willow loved poetry and could recite entire passages from Tennyson and Whitman. She learned that Franklin had a gift with horses, that he could gentle the wildest mustang with patience and soft words. He told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about coming west after his parents died, looking for a fresh start. She confided her dream of someday running a school, of teaching children who might otherwise never learn to read or figure sums. As summer turned to fall, the cottonwoods along the river blazing gold and orange, Franklin realized he was falling in love with Willow Reed. It was a terrifying and exhilarating feeling, made more complicated by their vastly different circumstances. He was a ranch hand with modest savings and uncertain prospects. She was an educated woman who deserved a house with glass windows and a garden, books on the shelves and music in the parlor. What could he possibly offer her beyond a hard life of endless work and simple pleasures? But when he looked at Willow, he saw something in her eyes that gave him hope. She looked at him not as a rough cowboy beneath her notice, but as a man worth knowing, worth spending time with. She listened when he talked about his work, laughed at his stories, touched his hand gently when he spoke of his lost parents. And slowly, carefully, Franklin began to believe that perhaps love could bridge the gap between their different worlds. The trouble came in early October, just as Franklin was working up the courage to speak to Willow about his feelings. He was in town on a Wednesday evening, walking Willow back to the boarding house after they had attended a church social together, when Theodore Maxwell stepped out of the shadows near the livery stable. "Well, well," Theodore said, his voice slurred with whiskey. "The thieving cowboy and my runaway bride. How cozy." Franklin instinctively moved to put himself between Willow and Theodore. "Go home, Maxwell. You are drunk. Drunk enough to speak the truth," Theodore shot back. "That woman owes me $300 plus damages for breach of contract. I have been patient, but my patience has run out. Either she comes with me now, or I am pressing charges with the sheriff in the morning." "On what grounds?" Franklin demanded. "You cannot press charges against someone for refusing to marry you." "Theft and fraud," Theodore said, pulling a document from his coat pocket. "Her father signed a contract promising her hand in marriage in exchange for funds. She broke that contract. In the eyes of the law, that makes her a thief." Willow's hand clutched Franklin's arm, her fingers digging in with fear. "That is not how the law works, and you know it," she said, but her voice trembled. "Maybe, maybe not," Theodore said with an ugly grin. "But I have the best lawyer in the county, and you have nothing." "Who do you think the judge will believe?" Franklin felt fury rising in him like a red tide. "Leave her alone, Maxwell. She has done nothing wrong." "Then let her pay back what she owes," Theodore suggested mockingly. $300 plus $100 for my trouble and embarrassment. $400 total, and I will drop the matter. $400. It might as well have been $4,000 for all Franklin could afford it. His entire savings amounted to perhaps $75 after 4 years of careful economizing, and he knew Willow had nothing. "I will need time," Franklin heard himself saying. "Time to raise the money." Theodore laughed. You are a 2-bit ranch hand who will never see $400 in his lifetime. No, I think I will just take her now and we can settle accounts later in the privacy of my ranch." The threat was clear, and Franklin saw red. He launched himself at Theodore, his fist connecting with the man's jaw in a satisfying crunch. Theodore went down hard, and Franklin was on him in an instant, landing another punch before strong hands pulled him back. Enough. It was Sheriff Turner, drawn by the commotion. "What in blazes is going on here?" "That man assaulted me," Theodore shouted, struggling to his feet with blood streaming from his nose. "I want him arrested." "Franklin was defending me," Willow said quickly. "Mr. Maxwell accosted us, threatened me, said he would take me by force." Sheriff Turner looked between the three of them, his weathered face troubled. "I heard the shouting from my office. Maxwell, you were making threats against Miss Reed." "I have legal grounds," Theodore insisted, waving his crumpled document. "Her father signed a contract." "A contract to marry is not enforceable by force," the sheriff said firmly. "You know that as well as I do. Miss Reed has the right to refuse any marriage. Now go home and sleep off that whiskey before I throw you in a cell for drunk and disorderly conduct." Theodore glared at all of them, but he was smart enough not to argue with the sheriff. "This is not over," he said, pointing at Franklin. "You will regret the day you crossed me." After Theodore had staggered off into the night, Sheriff Turner turned to Franklin. "Son, I understand you were defending the lady, but you cannot go around punching people, even if they deserve it. You are lucky Maxwell was too drunk to press charges properly, but you need to be careful. He meant what he said about getting even." "I know, sir," Franklin said quietly, "but I could not just let him threaten Willow like that. The sheriff's expression softened. "I know and I respect that, but Maxwell has connections, money to hire lawyers and men. You watch yourself, you hear?" Franklin promised he would, and the sheriff headed back to his office. Franklin walked Willow the rest of the way to the boarding house in silence, his knuckles throbbing from where they had connected with Theodore's face. At the porch steps, Willow turned to him, and in the lamplight spilling from the windows, Franklin could see tears glistening in her eyes. "You should not have done that," she whispered. "Now he will come after you too." "I am not afraid of Theodore Maxwell," Franklin said, though that was not entirely true. "I am more afraid of what might happen if I do not protect you." Willow reached up and touched his face, her fingers cool against his cheek. "Why are you doing this for me, Franklin? We barely know each other." "This is not your fight." Franklin caught her hand in his, marveling at how small and delicate it felt. "It became my fight the moment I cut those ropes. And Willow, I think you know by now that my feelings for you go beyond simple protection. I care about you. I care about you more than I have ever cared about anyone." He saw her breath catch, saw the way her eyes widened. "Franklin," she whispered, "I care about you too, but you deserve better than a woman who comes with nothing but trouble and debt. You should find someone else, someone who can be a proper partner to you." "There is no one else," Franklin said firmly. "There is only you. From that first moment I saw you step off that stagecoach with your wrists bound, looking so brave and so afraid at the same time. There has only been you." Willow made a small sound, half sob and half laugh. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish." "Perhaps both," Franklin admitted. "But Willow, I need you to know that I will not let Theodore take you. I will find a way to keep you safe, to make this right. I do not know how yet, but I will." $400, Willow said miserably. "Where would we ever get $400? Franklin did not have an answer to that, but he held Willow's hand a moment longer, trying to pour all his determination and devotion into that simple touch. When he finally rode back to the ranch that night, his mind was churning with possibilities, each more desperate than the last. Over the next few days, Franklin tried everything he could think of to raise money quickly. He asked Mr. Henderson for an advance on his wages, but the old rancher, though sympathetic, could only spare $20 beyond what he had already paid. Franklin sold his spare saddle and his rifle, the only items of value he owned beyond his horse, and that brought in another $30. He played poker in the bunkhouse, hoping to multiply his money, but lost $15 instead. By the end of the week, he had only $90 total, less than a quarter of what he needed. Desperation gnawed at him. He considered confronting Theodore directly, perhaps offering to work off the debt over time, but he knew that was not what the man really wanted. Theodore's pride had been wounded, his authority challenged in front of the whole town. He wanted revenge more than money, and Willow was the target of that revenge. It was Daniel who finally suggested the horse race. They were sitting outside the bunkhouse after supper, watching the stars come out, when Daniel mentioned that the annual Ukiah County race was coming up in 2 weeks. "First prize is $200, Daniel said casually. "Second prize is $75. You are the best horseman I know, Franklin. If anyone could win that race, it would be you." Franklin sat up straight. $200. If I won first place and added that to what I already have, I would still be short more than $100. "But if you won, you could negotiate from a position of strength," Daniel pointed out. "Show Maxwell you are serious about making things right. Offer him what you have with the rest to come. He might accept that." It was a slim chance, but it was the best chance Franklin had. The problem was the entry fee for the race was $50, money he could not spare if he lost. And even if he entered, He would be racing against some of the best riders in 3 counties, men who had trained their horses specifically for racing, who had money to buy the fastest animals available. But Franklin had something else. He had Shadow, a black Mustang stallion he had personally caught and broken 2 years earlier. Shadow was wild, spirited, and temperamental, hated being ridden by anyone but Franklin, but when he ran, he flew like the wind itself. Mr. Henderson had offered to buy Shadow from Franklin several times, but Franklin had always refused. The horse was his friend, his partner, and selling him would have felt like betrayal. Now, as Franklin looked out at the corral where Shadow stood watching him with intelligent dark eyes, he made a decision. He would enter the race on Shadow. It was risky, possibly even reckless, but it was the only real chance he had to raise the money Willow needed. The next Sunday, Franklin rode into town to tell Willow about his plan. He found her in the small vegetable garden behind the boarding house, pulling weeds with methodical determination. She looked up when his shadow fell across her, and the smile that blossomed on her face made Franklin's heart ache with longing. "I have been thinking about you all week," Willow said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Did Theodore cause any more trouble?" "Not yet," Franklin said. "But I have been working on a solution. There is a horse race in 2 weeks, Willow. First prize is $200. If I win, combined with what I have already saved and sold, I could offer Maxwell $300 and a promise for the rest. It might be enough to satisfy him." Willow's face went through a series of expressions: hope, fear, and something else that looked like love. "Franklin, horse racing is dangerous. Men get hurt, horses get hurt. I cannot let you risk yourself like that for me." "You are not letting me do anything," Franklin said gently. "I am choosing to do this. Willow, these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I know we have not spoken plainly about what is growing between us, but I think you feel it too. You are not just someone I am helping. You are the woman I love." He had not meant to say it quite so baldly, but once the words were out, Franklin felt relieved. Willow stared at him, her green eyes wide and glistening with tears. "You love me," she whispered. "I love you," Franklin confirmed. "I have loved you since the moment I cut those ropes and saw the fire in your eyes. I know I am just a ranch hand with nothing much to offer, but I will work hard, Willow. I will build us a good life. I will give you everything I have if you will have me." Willow launched herself into his arms with such force that Franklin staggered back a step. She was crying and laughing at the same time, her face buried in his chest. "You foolish, wonderful man," she said, her voice muffled by his shirt. "Of course I feel it too. I have been falling in love with you from the beginning, from the moment you stepped between me and Theodore, when you cut those ropes and told me I was free. You made me believe in hope again, Franklin. You made me believe in love." Franklin wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the clean scent of her hair. "Then you will let me race. Let me try to win us a future." Willow pulled back enough to look up at him, her hands resting on his chest. "I will let you race on one condition. You promise me that if something goes wrong, if the race is too dangerous, you will pull out. I need you safe more than I need Theodore's money, Franklin. I need you." "I promise," Franklin said, and then he did what he had been wanting to do for weeks. He leaned down and kissed her, his lips meeting hers in a tender exploration that quickly deepened into something more passionate. Willow kissed him back with a hunger that matched his own, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. "I will win this race," he murmured, "for us, for our future." "Just come back to me in one piece," Willow replied. "That is all I ask." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Franklin worked Shadow every day, pushing the stallion to run faster, to respond more quickly to commands. He studied the race course, which wound through the hills outside Ukiah for 5 miles before circling back to town. He talked to other racers, learning about strategy and tactics, about when to push and when to hold back. At night, he lay in his bunk and thought about Willow, about the life they could build together if he could just clear this one obstacle. Willow, for her part, tried to stay positive, but Franklin could see the worry in her eyes every time they met. Theodore had been quiet, but his silence felt ominous rather than reassuring. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see how this strange drama would resolve itself. The day of the race dawned clear and warm, a perfect October morning with just a hint of crispness in the air. Franklin rode Shadow into Ukiah early, wanting the horse to get comfortable with the crowds and noise before the race began. The main street had been transformed into a festival ground, with vendors selling food and drink, musicians playing fiddles and guitars, and children running wild with excitement. The race was the biggest event of the year, drawing people from all the surrounding ranches and farms. Franklin paid his $50 entry fee with hands that shook slightly, knowing he was gambling everything on this single race. There were 15 other riders entered, and as Franklin looked them over, his confidence wavered. He recognized professional riders from as far away as Sacramento, men whose entire livelihood depended on winning races. Their horses were sleek thoroughbreds, pampered and trained within an inch of their lives. Shadow, by contrast, looked half wild and slightly dangerous. The stallion tossed his head and showed his teeth when another horse came too close, and Franklin had to work to keep him calm. But Franklin knew what Shadow was capable of when given his head and allowed to run. The question was whether that raw speed and endurance could match the refined training of the thoroughbreds. He found Willow in the crowd, standing with Mrs. Patterson and several other women from the boarding house. She was wearing a pretty blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and when she saw Franklin, she broke away from the group to come to him. "Be careful," she said, reaching up to adjust his collar in a wifely gesture that made Franklin's heart swell. "Remember your promise." "I remember," Franklin assured her. He wanted to kiss her, but there were too many eyes watching. Instead, he squeezed her hand quickly. "This time tomorrow, we will be planning our future together without Theodore Maxwell hanging over us." "I like the sound of that," Willow said, attempting a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. The riders were called to the starting line, and Franklin mounted Shadow, feeling the familiar surge of connection between horse and rider. The stallion was ready to run, every muscle quivering with anticipation. Franklin leaned forward and whispered in Shadow's ear, "This is it, boy. This is the most important race of our lives. Let us show them what a wild Mustang can do." The starting gun fired with a crack that echoed across the valley. Shadow exploded forward, his powerful haunches driving them ahead of the pack in the first few strides. Franklin let him run, trusting the horse's instincts, focusing on the narrow dirt road that wound between the hills. The thunder of hooves was deafening, dust rising in choking clouds as 16 horses pounded along the track. The first mile was chaos as riders jockeyed for position. Franklin kept Shadow in the middle of the pack, not wanting to tire him out too early. The course climbed into the hills, the road twisting through stands of oak and madrone. Franklin knew from his reconnaissance that there was a dangerous hairpin turn at the 2-mile mark, and he watched carefully as several of the faster riders pulled ahead. They hit the turn at full speed, and Franklin heard a scream as one of the lead horses stumbled, throwing its rider. The man rolled clear, but the fallen horse created an obstacle that caused two other riders to swerve wildly. One clipped a tree and went down hard. Franklin guided Shadow around the chaos, losing some ground but keeping his seat and his horse safe. By the 3-mile mark, the field had spread out considerably. There were only 6 riders still in serious contention, with Franklin holding steady in 4th place. Shadow was breathing hard, but his stride was still strong, still regular. Franklin could feel the stallion's desire to run faster, to overtake the leaders, but he held back, remembering the advice of an old racer who had told him that stamina mattered more than speed over long distances. The course crested a final hill and then began the long descent back toward Ukiah. This was where Franklin made his move. He loosened his hold on the reins and gave Shadow his head. The stallion surged forward with a burst of speed that was exhilarating and terrifying. They passed the rider in 3rd place within seconds, then began closing on the 2 leaders. The crowd noise grew louder as they approached the final stretch. Franklin could see the finish line now, marked by colorful banners strung across the street. The 2 lead riders were matching each other stride for stride on matching bay thoroughbreds. They were 50 yards ahead, but Shadow was flying, eating up the distance with every powerful leap. Franklin crouched low over Shadow's neck, making himself as small as possible to reduce wind resistance. He could hear the stallion's labored breathing, could feel the horse giving him everything, holding nothing back. 40 yards. 30 yards. They passed one of the bays, whose rider looked over in shock as the wild Mustang shot past. 20 yards to go, and they were neck and neck with the final leader, a professional rider from Sacramento on a beautiful gray mare. The man looked over at Franklin, eyes wide with disbelief and determination. He raised his crop to whip his horse faster, and Franklin felt a moment of anger at the cruelty. He would never use a whip on Shadow, would never force the horse beyond what he was willing to give freely. But Shadow had his own ideas about winning. The stallion seemed to sense the challenge, seemed to understand what was at stake. With a final tremendous effort, Shadow found another gear that Franklin had not even known existed. They pulled ahead by a nose, then a neck, then a full length, crossing the finish line a clear winner as the crowd erupted in cheers. Franklin pulled Shadow up gently, his hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. The stallion was covered in sweat, sides heaving, but his eyes were bright and proud. Franklin slid from the saddle and threw his arms around Shadow's neck, not caring who saw him being emotional over a horse. "You magnificent creature," Franklin whispered. "You absolute marvel. You did it. We did it." Then Willow was there, pushing through the crowd, and Franklin caught her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. "You won, Franklin, you won." "We won," Franklin corrected, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "This was for us." The prize ceremony was held an hour later, after all the riders had been accounted for, and the horses tended to. Franklin accepted his $200 prize money from the mayor with a sense of unreality, as though he were watching someone else's life unfold. Combined with his other savings, he now had $290, still short of the $400 Theodore had demanded, but enough to make a serious offer. He discussed the situation with Sheriff Turner, who agreed to act as a mediator. That evening in the sheriff's office, Franklin and Willow met with Theodore Maxwell to settle the matter once and for all. Theodore looked sour, his nose still slightly swollen from where Franklin had hit him. But he listened as Franklin laid out his offer. $290 now, with the remaining $110 to be paid in installments over the next year. Franklin would sign a promissory note, binding him legally to the debt. "You expect me to accept less than what I am owed?" Theodore sneered. I expect you to accept a reasonable settlement that gets you most of your money back and allows Miss Reed to live her life in peace, Franklin replied evenly. The alternative is we take this to court, where a judge will likely rule that you have no claim whatsoever on Miss Reed or her future. Her father signed that contract, not her. She has no legal obligation to honor it. Theodore's lawyer, who had accompanied him, leaned over and whispered urgently in his client's ear. Franklin could not hear what was said, but he could guess. The lawyer was almost certainly pointing out that Franklin was right about the law. Finally, Theodore slapped his hand on the desk. Fine. I will accept your money and your note, but I want interest on the remaining balance. 10%. 5%, Franklin countered. And I want a signed document stating that once the debt is paid, you will have no further claim on Miss Reed or any matter related to her. They haggled for another 20 minutes before finally reaching an agreement. Franklin signed the promissory note with a sense of freedom, knowing that while he was taking on debt, he was also securing Willow's safety and future. Theodore signed the release document with poor grace, snatched up his money, and left without another word. When the door closed behind him, Willow sagged against Franklin in relief. "Is it really over?" she whispered. "It is really over," Franklin confirmed. "You are free, Willow, truly free." Sheriff Turner cleared his throat diplomatically. "I will just go check on something in the back office," he said, giving them privacy. Alone in the sheriff's office, Franklin took Willow's hands in his. "I know this is fast," he said. "I know we have only known each other for a few months. But Willow, I meant what I said about loving you. I want to marry you if you will have me. I cannot offer you much right now, just a ranch hand's wages and a heart that belongs entirely to you. But I promise I will work hard to give you a good life." Willow's eyes were shining with tears again, but these were happy tears. "Franklin McCoy, I do not need much. I need a man who sees me as a person, not property. A man who would risk everything to keep me safe. A man with honor and courage and the kindest heart I have ever known. You are that man, and yes, I will marry you. I will marry you tomorrow if you want." Franklin laughed, giddy with joy. "Tomorrow might be a bit fast even for me, but soon, Willow, as soon as we can arrange it properly." They married 3 weeks later in the small church in Ukiah, with half the town in attendance. Mrs. Patterson cried openly, declaring it the most romantic wedding she had ever seen. The Hendersons gave Franklin a wedding bonus and 2 weeks off for a honeymoon. Several of the other ranch hands chipped in to rent Franklin and Willow a tiny house on the edge of town. Just a single room with a kitchen area. But it was theirs, and it was perfect. On their wedding night, Franklin carried Willow across the threshold of that little house, both of them laughing at the absurdity and the sweetness of it. He set her down gently, and then just looked at her for a long moment, marveling that this extraordinary woman was now his wife. "I still cannot quite believe you are real," Franklin said softly. "That you chose me." Willow reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I chose you because you are the best man I have ever known. Because when I was at my lowest, when I had given up hope, you reminded me that there is still goodness in the world. You saved me, Franklin, in every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," Franklin replied. "I did not even know I was lost until I found you." They came together then in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, the culmination of months of longing and restraint. Franklin lifted Willow into his arms and carried her to the bed, and they celebrated their union with gentle reverence and growing passion, learning each other's bodies, speaking in whispered words and soft touches until the moon rose high outside their window. The next months were a time of adjustment and joy. Willow continued to work part-time for Mrs. Patterson, saving money toward their future. Franklin threw himself into his ranch work with renewed energy, knowing that every dollar he earned was building the foundation for their life together. They were poor by most standards, but rich in the ways that mattered. In love, in companionship, in the simple pleasure of building a life together. Franklin made his monthly payments to Theodore faithfully, and gradually the debt shrank. By the time their first anniversary approached, he had only 3 payments left. They had saved enough to buy a small piece of land just outside Ukiah, 5 acres with a creek running through it and good soil for a garden. Franklin spent his evenings after work building them a proper house, a small cabin with glass windows and a real floor, and Willow worked beside him, hauling lumber and driving nails with determination. On their first anniversary, Franklin came home from the ranch to find Willow glowing with excitement. She met him at the door of their cabin, which was finally finished enough to live in, and took both his hands in hers. "I have news," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Franklin, we are going to have a baby." Franklin felt his knees go weak. A baby. A child of his own, of their love. He pulled Willow into his arms, holding her carefully as though she were made of precious glass. "Are you sure?" "When?" The doctor confirmed it today. "Early summer, he thinks." "June or July." Willow pulled back to look at him, sudden worry creasing her brow. "You are happy about this? I know we did not plan it quite so soon." "Happy," Franklin laughed, the sound breaking with emotion. "Willow, I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed. I am grateful. I am terrified and excited and so completely in love with you, I can hardly stand it." They celebrated quietly that evening, sharing a simple meal and talking about the future, about names for the baby and how they would need to add another room to the cabin. Franklin felt a contentment settle over him that he had never known before, a sense of rightness about his life and his choices. The baby came in late June of 1879, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Franklin's father, and Franklin held his son in his arms and wept openly, amazed that something so small and perfect could exist in the world. Willow proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but also practical. She sang to Thomas, told him stories, read to him from books Mrs. Patterson donated. Franklin would come home from the ranch to find his wife and son in the garden, Willow teaching even the infant about the plants growing there, and his heart would swell with so much love he thought it might burst. They made their final payment to Theodore Maxwell in October of that year, and Franklin burned the promissory note in their fireplace while Willow cheered. They were free of debt, free of the past, free to build whatever future they chose. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Franklin began to think about his own future at the ranch. He loved the work, loved the Hendersons who had been so good to him, but he wanted more for his family. He wanted land of their own, cattle of their own, something to pass down to Thomas and whatever other children might come. It was Willow who suggested the solution. They were sitting on their porch one evening, watching Thomas toddle after fireflies in the gathering dusk, when she said, "What if we started our own small operation? We have the 5 acres. We could add to it gradually, maybe buy some young cattle, breed them up. You have the skills, Franklin. You know ranching better than anyone." Franklin considered this. It would mean leaving the security of working for the Hendersons, striking out on their own with all the risks that entailed. But it would also mean building something that was truly theirs, something they could shape according to their own vision. "It would be hard at first," Franklin said slowly. "Very hard. We might struggle." "We have struggled before," Willow pointed out, "and we came through it together." "I believe in you, Franklin. I believe in us." That belief gave Franklin the courage to take the leap. He gave the Hendersons 6 months' notice, wanting to leave them time to find and train a replacement. In that time, He and Willow saved every penny they could, and Franklin made a deal with a neighbor to buy 5 head of young cattle. It was not much, but it was a start. The Hendersons, when they learned of Franklin's plans, were supportive and generous. On his last day of work, they presented him with Shadow, who Franklin had always considered his horse but who had technically belonged to the ranch. "That horse loves you and only you," Mr. Henderson said gruffly. "He would be miserable with anyone else. Consider him our investment in your future success." Franklin was moved beyond words. He shook Mr. Henderson's hand and promised to make them proud. Running their own small ranch was every bit as hard as Franklin had anticipated, and then some. The work was endless: fencing, building shelters for the cattle, maintaining the water sources, dealing with predators and weather, and 100 other challenges. Money was always tight, and there were times when Franklin lay awake at night wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. But Willow never wavered in her faith in him. She worked alongside Franklin in the fields, managed their finances with careful precision, and somehow kept the household running smoothly even as she cared for Thomas and then, a year later, for their daughter Rose, who arrived with the spring flowers and brought new joy to their little family. Slowly, gradually, their hard work began to pay off. The cattle they had bought had calves, and those calves grew into sellable stock. Franklin developed a reputation for raising healthy, well-bred animals. He began doing some horse training on the side, using the skills he had honed with Shadow to gentle difficult horses for other ranchers. The extra income allowed them to buy more land, to expand their herd, to improve their cabin into a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a real parlor. By the time Thomas was 5 and Rose was 3, the McCoy Ranch was a thriving concern, modest by some standards but successful enough to provide a comfortable life for the family. Franklin could look around at what they had built and feel justifiable pride. Willow, meanwhile, had not forgotten her dream of teaching. When Thomas reached school age, she discovered that Ukiah had no proper school, just a traveling teacher who came through once a month. Willow began teaching Thomas and several neighbor children in their home, and word spread quickly about the quality of her instruction. Within a year, the town council approached her about establishing a permanent school, and they provided a small building and a modest salary. Franklin could not have been more proud as he watched his wife transform that one-room schoolhouse into a place of learning and growth for dozens of children. She taught them reading and writing, arithmetic and history, but also kindness and critical thinking. Parents praised her constantly, and Franklin would watch her with her students and remember that scared, bound woman on the stagecoach, and marvel at the journey they had both traveled. Their family continued to grow. A second son, Henry, arrived when Rose was 2, and then another daughter, Emma, 2 years after that. The McCoy house was full of noise and laughter, of children learning to ride horses and helping with ranch chores, of bedtime stories and family suppers around the big table Franklin had built with his own hands. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed, Franklin and Willow would sit on their porch and watch the stars come out over the hills. Sometimes they talked about the early days, about that fateful moment when Franklin had cut the ropes binding Willow's wrists, when their eyes had met, and something fundamental had shifted in both their lives. You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not stepped forward that day? Willow asked once, her head resting on Franklin's shoulder. "I try not to," Franklin admitted. "I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You and the children, you are everything to me." "You gave me back my life," Willow said softly. "You gave me freedom and love and a family of my own. I can never repay that gift." "You repay it every day just by being you," Franklin replied, kissing the top of her head. by loving me, by building this life with me. You are my greatest treasure, Willow. You always will be. As the years passed, the McCoy family became a fixture in Ukiah. Franklin served on the town council, using his position to advocate for fair treatment of workers and small ranchers. Willow's school grew to employ 2 additional teachers, but she remained the heart and soul of the institution, beloved by generations of students. Thomas grew into a tall young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's intelligence, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Rose proved to have a gift for music and teaching, and she began helping her mother at the school. Henry developed into an exceptional horseman, with dreams of starting a breeding program for quality horses. Emma, the baby, was still finding her way but showed signs of her mother's teaching abilities and her father's compassion. Theodore Maxwell had left Ukiah shortly after Franklin paid off his debt, his reputation in tatters after word spread about how he had treated Willow. Franklin heard years later that Theodore had died in a saloon fight in Sacramento, drunk and bitter and alone. Franklin felt a brief moment of pity for the man, but mostly he felt grateful that their paths had diverged when they did. On their 20th anniversary, Franklin surprised Willow with a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation since their honeymoon. They left the children in the capable hands of Mrs. Patterson, who was still spry and sharp despite her advancing years, and took the stage north to the city. Walking through San Francisco's streets, Willow pointed out places from her childhood. The house where she had lived with her father, the park where her mother had taken her before she died, the market where she had shopped for groceries. But Willow felt no desire to stay, no pull to return to her old life. This was just a visit, a brief glimpse into her past before returning to the life and the family that truly mattered. On their last night in the city, Franklin took Willow to a fine restaurant, the kind of place where the ranch hand version of himself would never have dared to enter. But he was no longer just a ranch hand. He was a successful rancher, a landowner, a respected member of his community. And Willow, in a beautiful dress that Franklin had secretly commissioned from the dressmaker in Ukiah, looked like the lady she had always been inside. Over oysters and wine, Franklin raised his glass in a toast. "To 20 years," he said. "To the day I cut those ropes and found my destiny. To the woman who has made every day since an adventure and a joy. I love you, Willow McCoy. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Willow's eyes were misty as she clinked her glass against his. "To the cowboy who saved me and then made all my dreams come true. To the life we have built and the love that sustains us. You are my hero, Franklin McCoy, today and always." They returned to Ukiah refreshed and reconnected, ready to embrace the next chapter of their lives. The children were growing up, beginning to forge their own paths, but the ranch and the school continued to thrive under Franklin and Willow's guidance. More years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the changing seasons. Franklin's hair turned silver at the temples, and Willow's auburn became streaked with white, but they remained as devoted to each other as they had been in those early days. They danced at their children's weddings, rejoiced at the birth of grandchildren, mourned the passing of old friends like Mrs. Patterson and the Hendersons. Through it all, through triumph and tragedy, joy and sorrow, Franklin and Willow faced life together. They had built something lasting and beautiful from the unpromising beginning of a mail-order bride arrangement gone wrong. They had taken a moment of injustice and transformed it into a love story that would echo through their family for generations. On a warm evening in June of 1908, 30 years after that fateful day in Ukiah, Franklin and Willow sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and purple. They were in their 50s now, still healthy and active but feeling the weight of the years. Around them, the ranch buzzed with activity. Thomas and his wife managing the main herd, Henry working with a young horse in the corral, Rose playing piano in the house while Emma supervised her own young children in the garden. "We have done well," Franklin said, taking Willow's hand in his. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "We did it together," Willow replied, squeezing his fingers. "Every step of the way." Franklin thought back to that young woman with bound wrists, to the moment when their eyes had met, and he had known with certainty that he had to act. He thought about the choice he had made, the risks he had taken, and the incredible rewards that had followed. "I would do it all again," Franklin said. "Every bit of it exactly the same, just to end up here with you." "You are getting sentimental in your old age," Willow teased gently, but her eyes were bright with emotion. "Can you blame me?" Franklin asked. "Look at what we have created. 4 wonderful children, 8 grandchildren and counting, a ranch that will support our family for generations, a school that has educated hundreds of children. And most importantly, we have each other. We have always had each other." Willow leaned her head on Franklin's shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, Rose was playing a waltz, and Franklin stood, offering his hand to Willow with a formal bow. "May I have this dance, Mrs. McCoy?" Willow laughed, the sound as musical and joyful as it had been 30 years earlier. "You may indeed, Mr. McCoy." They danced on the porch in the gathering darkness, moving together with the ease of long practice and deep love. The music from inside provided accompaniment, but they would have danced just as happily in silence, their hearts beating in sync, their bodies remembering every step of the long journey they had traveled together. As they swayed in the starlight, Franklin whispered into Willow's hair, "You're free now," echoing the words he had spoken so long ago when he had cut the ropes binding her wrists. "I have always been free," Willow whispered back. "From the moment you chose to help me, from the moment you loved me. You set me free, and then you gave me wings to fly. Thank you, my love. Thank you for everything." They held each other close as the music played on, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, courage over complacency. Their story had begun with an act of compassion, and had blossomed into something far greater than either could have imagined. The McCoy Ranch would continue for many years after that evening, passing from generation to generation. The school Willow founded still stands in Ukiah, bearing her name in recognition of her contributions to education in the community. And the descendants of Franklin and Willow McCoy still tell the story of how their great-great-grandparents met. A cowboy who saw injustice and could not look away. A bride who arrived with bound wrists and found freedom and love in the Wild West. But all of that is epilogue. The true story, the one that mattered most, was the story of 2 hearts finding each other in the dust and chaos of frontier California, of 2 people who chose to build a life together based on respect, partnership, and abiding love. It was a story written in the language of daily devotion, of small kindnesses and great sacrifices, of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. As Franklin and Willow danced on their porch that night, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, they knew with absolute certainty that they had found something rare and precious. They had found true love, the kind that endures through hardship and triumph, that grows stronger with each passing year, that transforms 2 individuals into something greater than the sum of their parts. The music ended, but Franklin and Willow continued to sway together, unwilling to let the moment end. Around them, the ranch settled into the rhythms of night, cattle lowing softly in the distance, horses nickering in the barn, crickets beginning their evening chorus. Inside the house, grandchildren were being tucked into bed with stories and kisses, the next generation being raised with the same love and values that had sustained Franklin and Willow through 3 decades of marriage. "You remember what you said to me on our wedding night?" Willow asked softly. "You said you could not believe I was real." "I remember," Franklin replied, "and sometimes I still cannot. Sometimes I wake up and have to look over to make sure you are really there, that this life is not just a beautiful dream." "It is real," Willow assured him. "Every bit of it. The struggles and the joys, the ordinary moments and the extraordinary ones. We built this together, Franklin. We made it real through our choices, our work, our love." Franklin kissed her then, a kiss that held 30 years of love and devotion, a kiss that promised 30 more if they were blessed enough to have them. When they finally parted, both were smiling. "Come inside," Willow said, taking his hand. "Rose has made your favorite pie, and the grandchildren want you to tell them stories before bed." "What story should I tell them tonight?" Franklin asked, allowing himself to be led into the warm, lamp-lit house. "Tell them the true one," Willow suggested, her eyes twinkling. "Tell them about the day a cowboy cut the ropes binding a frightened woman's wrists and told her she was free. Tell them about how that simple act of kindness changed 2 lives forever. Tell them about love, Franklin. Tell them about us." And so Franklin did. He gathered the grandchildren around him in the parlor while the adults worked in the kitchen, and he told them the story of how he had met their grandmother. He told them about Shadow winning the race, about building their first little house, about all the struggles and triumphs that had followed. The children listened with wide eyes, asking questions, wanting to know every detail. Rose played piano softly in the background, providing a soundtrack to the story. Thomas and his wife brought in coffee and pie for the adults. Henry sat by the window, half listening to his father's story and half watching the horses in the moonlit corral. Emma supervised her youngest child, making sure he did not interrupt his grandfather's tale. It was an ordinary evening in the McCoy household, and yet it was also extraordinary because it was filled with love, with family, with the knowledge that they were all part of something larger than themselves. They were part of a story that had begun with injustice and courage, that had been sustained by love and hard work, that would continue long after Franklin and Willow were gone. When the story was finished and the grandchildren had been herded off to bed, when the dishes had been washed and the house had grown quiet, Franklin and Willow retired to their own bedroom. It was a comfortable room, neither fancy nor austere, filled with the accumulated treasures of 30 years together. Photographs of their children, a quilt Willow had made during her first pregnancy, the knife Franklin had used to cut her bonds that first day, now mounted in a frame as a reminder of where their journey had begun. They prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of long married couples, moving around each other smoothly in the small space. When they finally lay down together, Willow curled into Franklin's side the way she had done for 3 decades, her head on his shoulder, her hand over his heart. "I love you," Franklin murmured into the darkness. "I love you too," Willow replied, "always and forever." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, 2 souls perfectly matched, perfectly content. Outside, the California night wrapped around the McCoy ranch like a blessing, and in the barn, Shadow, now old and gray but still proud, whinnied softly, as if he too understood that this family, this love, was something special and worth protecting. The years continued to roll by as years do. Franklin and Willow grew older, their hair turning completely white, their steps becoming slower but no less purposeful. They celebrated 40 years of marriage, then 45. They welcomed more grandchildren and then great-grandchildren. They saw their children succeed in their chosen paths, saw the ranch expand and prosper, saw Willow's school system grow to include multiple buildings and teachers. Through it all, their love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. They still held hands when they walked through town. They still stole kisses in the kitchen when they thought no one was looking. They still danced on the porch when Rose played the piano. They still told each other, "I love you," every single day, never taking for granted the precious gift they had been given. When Franklin was 72 and Willow was 70, they decided to take one more trip to San Francisco. Their children and grandchildren protested, worried about the journey, but Franklin and Willow were determined. They wanted to see the city one more time, to walk the streets where Willow had grown up, to close that chapter of their lives with intention and grace. The city had changed dramatically in the 40-plus years since Willow had left. The earthquake and fire of 1906 had reshaped much of the landscape, and new buildings towered where old ones had stood. But some things remained the same. The fog rolling in from the bay, the sound of the cable cars, the energy of a city constantly reinventing itself. They visited the docks where Willow had boarded the stagecoach that had brought her to Ukiah and to Franklin. Standing there, looking out at the water, Willow took Franklin's hand. "What if you had not been there that day?" she mused. "What if you had gone into town a day earlier or a day later? What if you had looked the other way when I stumbled off that coach?" "I do not believe in what-ifs," Franklin said firmly. "I believe we were meant to find each other, Willow. Call it fate or providence or simple luck, but I was exactly where I needed to be that day, and so were you." "Then I am grateful for fate or providence or luck," Willow said, leaning into him, "because I cannot imagine a better life than the one we have lived together." They returned to Ukiah, energized by their trip, but also relieved to be home. The ranch welcomed them back with open arms, literally, as their children and grandchildren gathered for a welcome home dinner that filled the house with noise and laughter. That night, lying in their own bed after weeks of strange hotels and unfamiliar rooms, Franklin pulled Willow close and breathed in the familiar scent of her hair, soap and lavender and something uniquely her. "We are blessed," he said simply. "Yes," Willow agreed. "So very blessed." They lived another 10 years in happiness and contentment, watching their family grow and flourish, continuing to contribute to their community in meaningful ways. Franklin remained active on the ranch until his late 70s, though he finally agreed to let Thomas handle the more physically demanding tasks. Willow taught at her school until she was 75, finally retiring when her eyesight began to fail. On a spring morning in 1924, Franklin woke early as was his habit and lay quietly, watching Willow sleep beside him. She looked peaceful, her white hair spread across the pillow, her face relaxed. At 80, she was still the most beautiful woman Franklin had ever seen. He thought about the journey they had traveled together, about all the moments big and small that had comprised their life. He thought about the day he had cut those ropes and told her she was free. He thought about their wedding day, about the birth of each of their children, about building the house and the ranch and the school. He thought about every sunrise they had watched together, every sunset, every ordinary day made extraordinary by the simple fact of being together. Willow's eyes fluttered open, and when she saw Franklin watching her, she smiled. "Good morning, my love." "Good morning," Franklin replied, leaning over to kiss her softly. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am." "We are both lucky," Willow corrected. "To have found each other, to have built this life, to have loved and been loved so well. Not everyone gets that gift, Franklin." "No," Franklin agreed. Not everyone does. They rose and dressed, moving through their morning routine with practiced ease. They had breakfast with 3 of their grandchildren who were staying at the ranch, then walked together to check on the horses. Shadow had passed years earlier, but his descendants filled the corrals, all of them bearing his black coat and wild spirit. In the afternoon, Thomas brought news that one of the cows was having trouble birthing, and Franklin went to help despite Willow's protests that he should leave such things to the younger men. Together, Franklin and Thomas successfully delivered the calf, a healthy bull that would grow into a fine addition to the herd. That evening, exhausted but satisfied, Franklin and Willow sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The sunset was particularly beautiful that night, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and gold. "When I am gone," Franklin said suddenly, and Willow turned to him in alarm. "Do not talk like that," she said. "We have to talk about it eventually," Franklin said gently. "We are getting old, Willow. Our time will come whether we are ready or not, and when it does, I need you to know something." "What?" Willow asked, her voice trembling slightly. "That you have been the great joy of my life," Franklin said, taking both her hands in his. "That every day with you has been a gift. That if I could go back and live my life over, I would not change a single thing because every choice, every moment led me to you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willow McCoy. You are my heart." Willow was crying now, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "And you are mine. You saved me, Franklin, not just from Theodore Maxwell, but from a life of despair and hopelessness. You showed me what love could be, what it should be. You gave me everything." They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars emerged. Around them, the ranch settled into evening, but Franklin and Willow remained on the porch, unwilling to break the spell of the moment. "Promise me something," Willow said finally. "Anything," Franklin replied. "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter which of us goes first, we will find each other again. In the next life, in heaven, wherever souls go when this life is done. Promise me this is not the end, just a pause." "I promise," Franklin said solemnly. "I will find you, Willow. Across time, across space, across whatever separates us. I will always find you." They sat together under the stars until the evening grew cool and Thomas came to gently suggest they come inside. They went, hand in hand, into the house filled with family and love, and they knew with certainty that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else for the past 46 years. Franklin McCoy lived to be 84, passing peacefully in his sleep with Willow beside him. Willow followed him 18 months later, having lived to see another generation of McCoys born. They were buried side by side in the Ukiah Cemetery under a simple headstone that read, "Franklin and Willow McCoy, beloved parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, together forever." But their story did not end with their deaths. It lived on in the ranch that still bears their name, in the school that still educates children according to Willow's principles, in the countless descendants who carry their genes and their values forward into the future. It lived on in the stories told around dinner tables, in the old photographs treasured in albums, in the way that love continued to be the foundation upon which the McCoy family built their lives. The tale of the cowboy who freed the bound bride became legend in Ukiah and the surrounding territory, a reminder that courage and compassion can change lives, that love can flourish even in the harshest conditions, that the choices we make in crucial moments define not just our own lives, but the lives of generations to come. And so the story ends where it began, with an act of kindness, with ropes being cut and freedom granted, with 2 souls recognizing each other across the space of a dusty California street. Franklin cut the ropes and said, "You're free now." And in doing so, he set in motion a love story that would echo through time, a testament to the power of choosing love over indifference, action over passivity, hope over despair. Their love had been tested by poverty and debt, by hard work and harder times, by all the challenges that life in the Wild West could throw at them. And their love had triumphed, not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real and true and built on a foundation of mutual respect, deep affection, and unwavering commitment. In the end, that is the heart of their story. Not the dramatic rescue or the horse race or any of the specific events that marked their journey, but the simple daily choice to love each other, to support each other, to build a life together one small decision at a time. They proved that love is not just a feeling or a moment, but an ongoing act of will, a commitment renewed every single day. And they proved that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is to step forward when others step back, to offer help when it is needed, to cut the ropes that bind another human being and offer them freedom. Because in freeing Willow, Franklin had also freed himself from loneliness, from an empty future, from a life half-lived. In saving her, he had saved himself. In loving her, he had learned what it meant to truly be alive. That dusty August day in 1878, when the stagecoach pulled into Ukiah and Willow Reed stumbled out with bound wrists, had seemed like an ending, the final chapter in a tragedy of betrayal and lost hope. But Franklin McCoy had seen it differently. He had seen it as a beginning, and he had been right. It had been the beginning of everything that mattered: love, family, purpose, joy. Years after both Franklin and Willow had passed, their great-great-grandson would stand in the same spot where Franklin had first cut those ropes, now marked by a small plaque commemorating the event. He would try to imagine that moment, to picture his ancestor stepping forward when others stood still, offering freedom with the swift stroke of a knife and the simple words, "You're free now." And he would understand, as all the McCoy descendants understood, that freedom was just the beginning. What came after the love, the partnership, the building of a life together, that was the real story. That was what transformed a single moment of courage into a legacy that would endure for generations. The Wild West was a harsh and unforgiving place, a land where survival often required hardness and where gentleness could be seen as weakness. But Franklin and Willow had proven that love was not weakness but the greatest strength of all. They had carved out a life of beauty and meaning in that rough landscape, had raised a family rooted in love and respect, had contributed to their community in lasting ways. Their story became the kind of tale parents told children, the kind of example couples aspired to follow, the kind of legacy that made people believe in the power of love to overcome any obstacle. Because if a simple cowboy and a bound bride could find happiness and purpose together, if they could build something lasting from such an unpromising beginning, then anyone could. Love was possible. Hope was justified. Happy endings were real. And so the story of Franklin and Willow McCoy passed into history and legend, a reminder of a time when the West was wild and life was hard, but love could still flourish. A testament to the truth that the most important thing we can do for another person is to see them, truly see them, and offer them the freedom to be who they were meant to be. Franklin had seen Willow that day in Ukiah, had seen past the ropes and the tears to the strong, intelligent, capable woman beneath. And Willow had seen Franklin, had recognized in him a man of honor and courage, a man worth loving. They had built a life on that mutual recognition, on that foundation of really seeing and valuing each other. And that life had been rich beyond measure, filled with simple joys and profound satisfactions, with challenges overcome and dreams realized, with love that deepened and strengthened with every passing year, until death itself could not diminish it. This was their story. This was their legacy. And this was their gift to all who came after. Proof that love conquers all, that kindness matters, that one person acting with courage and compassion can change the world, or at least change one person's world, and sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is everything.